Okay, now recording officially started. Warm welcome to everyone to the second part of our expert talk series, Powering Agribusiness through Carbon Market and Climate Action. Today webinar is entitled Climate Smart Strategy for Resilient Livestock. We continue our exploration of the topics carbon market, climate action and livestock together. I just want to say these expert talks are organized by the Agribusiness Facility for Africa, who is implementing the business support facility for resilient agricultural value chain together with its sister project MoveCom Cashew. This joint action is co-financed by the European Union under the SAMOA agreement with OACPS and by the General Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, PMC. And we are very much welcome to have you all here today. So my name is Lule Faure and I'm advisor for the Agribusiness Facility for Africa, and I will be your moderator today. So this series is about exploring how integrating climate action and carbon markets into the livestock value chain is very important for sustainable agricultural development and for addressing climate change. As you know, and as we prefaced on Monday already, implement livestock production significantly contributes to greenhouse gas emission, but of course implementing these climate smart strategies and climate smart practices, as for example also engaging in carbon markets, really allow livestock producers to not only reduce the environmental footprint, but also to strengthen the resilience of their practices and supporting global climate goals. The approach is not only to offset emission, but also to promote sustainable land management, enhance your productivity, and also bolster the livelihood of farming communities. So the Monday, for those who were there, we started exploring the question of the voluntary carbon market, specifically in the context of livestock projects. We really try to understand what they are, discuss strategy for feasibility, and also cost benefit sharing. So you can find the recording on YouTube. And today we will continue to further explore a little bit more climate action, specifically in the livestock sector. And then we will zoom in again on voluntary carbon market projects as they relate to climate action for the livestock sector. And we will have very interesting deep dive and a case study for this and best practice for these voluntary carbon market projects. And today we are very honored to have really two great speakers. So let me introduce our speakers for today before I leave the floor to them. So first we have Ms. Saskia Repin, who is a livestock and climate change specialist at the FAO. She has been working there for almost 10 years and has extensive background in agricultural development. She has field experience in Africa, and her career has really been focused on climate change and sustainable development of agri-food system. She has supported countries and stakeholders in integrating climate action into the livestock sector and contributing to the sustainable transformation of livestock system. So she holds a master in agricultural development from the University of Copenhagen and is currently even pursuing a second one in climate change and development at the SOAS University of London. So Saskia will be our first presenter, focusing on really climate action in the livestock sector. And then we will have also the great honor to welcome Mr. Habil Onyango, who is an economist, also holder of a master's degree and most importantly, 16 years of experience in implementing, monitoring, verifying, reporting, and managing carbon projects in Kenya that promote agroforestry, land restoration, and climate change response for farming communities. He has extensive experience in that field and in project implementing under VCS and certified under Vera and Gold standard. He can share with us his really good understanding of carbon accounting methodology, how to design and execute carbon projects, and will share his also specific experience with us today. So without further ado, I will call Saskia. If you want to turn now your camera on and take over the screen sharing for our first input of the day.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lou, for this kind introduction. I'm very excited to be here. So hello, everyone. I hope you see my screen and you hear me well. Everything is fine. Thank you. So yeah, today I will be talking about climate action and mitigation in livestock systems. So as Lou said, I'm working for FAO headquarters. I'm currently based in remotely in Cape Town in South Africa. Yeah, and I've been supporting several countries specifically on enhancing their livestock climate action, their climate actions in the livestock sector. And now moving on to the next slide. So today my presentation will be a bit structured in 4 pieces. So I want to give you a small introduction and a global context. Then we'll look closer at the role of livestock in climate action. Then I'm going to dive into all the matters related to livestock greenhouse gas mitigation and specifically focusing on methane reduction. And then I will close with a short overview of our work at FAO and of course key points from our presentation. So the headlines nowadays are really much about livestock and carbon. So from different angles, media talks about, on the one hand, some farmers that have great concern for high increasing costs because of introduction of carbon taxes. But on the other hand, there are a lot of talk about all the opportunities that carbon credits can bring to livestock farmers. So that's also why currently actually FAO is working also on this topic. And as you know, FAO is a member-driven organization. So it means that the countries, the members of FAO have actually requested us in the Committee on Agriculture, Subcommittee on Livestock, to look into this into more detail and to come up and develop some new guidance document specifically on the opportunities and the risks for the members to participate in compliant and voluntary carbon markets. This is obviously, as I said, that's why this topic is really timely and is really important to address. So further, before going on in my presentation, as you noticed today, I will be talking more really on the livestock sector and the mitigations, but to give that introduction on the carbon market. So what are we talking about when we talk about livestock mitigation actions in terms of generating carbon credits? There are 2 ways of doing this. On the one hand, we have obviously through avoiding emissions completely. So the definition is then obviously preventing emissions that would otherwise occur. And some examples from livestock are improving manure management to avoid the release of emissions, but also, for example, just reducing deforestation that may occur due to extension of pasture. The other option is to remove actively greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So that's when we talk about the sequestration of carbon from the atmosphere. And livestock examples here would be then silvopastoral systems that store a lot of carbon in soils and trees. Now, there are 2 different modalities when it comes to the livestock sector. There's the so-called offsetting. Offsetting, we're talking about when farmers, producers sell emission reductions to external buyers. So external would mean can even be outside of the country, outside of the value chain. And some examples here is by, for example, introducing feed additives in the production systems, or, for example, reducing burning of grassland So there are several management options. Then the other option, the other modality is the insetting. And insetting is when we talk about, for example, emission reduction within a company's own value chain. So obviously, for example, a dairy company has a very long value chain from the inputs, the production, and then the processing. So this is called insetting when it's basically the company investing in its own value chain. So, livestock systems globally are really diverse, and I want to mention again, livestock is not only there for producing meat and milk. Livestock systems support billions of people globally, worldwide, also specifically in rural areas. Livestock plays a really important role for nutrition and food security by providing essential proteins and micronutrients. Also here again, specifically very often to people that otherwise do not have an alternative access to other nutrients and nutritional food. Of course, livestock also plays a very important role in culture, in their traditions and social structures, but also in ecosystems, maintaining grasslands, for example, providing this, contributing to the nutrient cycle. However, obviously, we can't deny that globally, livestock also contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. So the graph that you're looking at now, that is a graph that comes from from the FAO Global Livestock Environment Assessment Model, GLEAM, and it provides you with the numbers for the direct emissions from livestock systems globally. So on the left hand, you can see the livestock species, and on the far right hand, the share of all the different greenhouse gases. So globally, you can also see that actually over 50%, so 54% of the emissions from livestock are methane emissions. And if we dive deeper, so from those 54%, it's actually over 85% that are the enteric methane emissions. And the rest would be methane emissions that are from manure production. So why is methane so important? This is a short background. So first of all, globally, the anthropogenic methane, as you can see on the left side of that graph, the biggest share is actually from agriculture, combining that enteric methane that I just talked about, but also from manure and from rice production. Obviously, also fossil fuel production and use has a major share. But now, again, methane, why it's so important? It's because it's a short-lived climate pollutant. It means that methane stays much shorter in the atmosphere than does CO2. And compared to CO2, methane also has a much, much higher global warming potential. So in the time that it remains in the atmosphere, it heats up the atmosphere much, much stronger. So that actually creates an opportunity, because it means that if we're able to reduce methane emissions now in the short term, we have also a short-term impact and to limit the peak warming that we are expecting. So enteric methane, coming back to the cow, to our ruminants. So there's also a link to a short video if you want to watch it later. So how is it produced? It's important to understand it a little bit to later on also understand how do we actually reduce it. So enteric methane is a biologically produced during the digestive process of ruminant animals such as cattle, sheep, and goats, and also other ruminants, so grazing animals mainly. And it's actually microbes that work in the rumen, so in the digestive system of the ruminants that digest the feed. And in this process, methane is actually released by this enteric fermentation process, so we call it. And then methane is expelled through belching of the cows. And now just as a reminder, so this whole process contributes actually accounts for 85% of all the livestock-related methane emissions. Now, globally, why then now again coming back to why does it matter for global climate goals? So you're all aware of the Paris Agreement, and the graph that you see here is an extract from a summary report of all the countries' climate commitments in the so-called nationally determined contributions. And the picture, unfortunately, isn't very good because the current existing policies, if they are implemented, it is not enough to reach the goal of the limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. But the good news is that also in one of the recent COPs in Glasgow, many countries came together, and additionally to their climate commitments, they have also committed in the Global Methane Pledge to reduce 30% of methane globally by 2030. The other good news is that livestock actually is well represented in terms of climate measures and climate action in countries' nationally determined contributions. But unfortunately, most countries do not provide specific targets and quantification of how much greenhouse gases can be reduced from livestock. So, but the bottom line is that actions in livestock are essential to meet the 2030 climate targets. So if we're looking towards the future and if we're trying to imagine our pathways, how to reduce emissions from livestock, it's first of all important to understand that the world population is projected to reach 9.8 billion by 2050. And that actually means with this population growth, obviously there's going to be an increased demand for milk and meat and eggs, etc. And this increase, so FAO has projected that globally by 2050, livestock production will increase by 20%. Now, if we're projecting this and if we're considering a so-called business as usual scenario, so if no changes would happen, this increase in production would actually also reflect in terms of an increase of greenhouse gas emissions from livestock systems by 46%. So there's this FAO publication, Pathways Towards Lower Emission, that has modeled all the different mitigation potentials from different actions along the livestock value chain. So I don't want to go too much into detail, but what I want to extract from this is the box that you're looking at. The box here actually shows you the different mitigation potential for all the different greenhouse gases. And we're looking at this block as measures that can be done on farm. So on-farm measures globally can actually contribute to 5 to 20% of the mitigation potential. So we're going to look now deeper. What are these on-farm measures and why it's important? It's important because actually most of these measures are not necessarily new technologies and require innovation, but many of them are actually low-cost measures. They are scalable. They have already been tested in the field. So we call them the so-called best practices. Now, looking at a summary of what kind of mitigation options exist in the livestock sector. So I grouped them here according to, so the first one would be the enteric methane reduction, which actually I'm going to go more into detail on the next slide. But the other option, which probably most of you are also much more familiar with, is the manure management. So by improving storage and handling, by integrating or production of biogas, or using digesters, or generally composting, we can reduce emissions. The other area of interventions would be in grazing and land management. So there are ways to graze land to enhance the soil carbon sequestration, such as using rotational grazing and pasture improvement. Then there's, of course, the whole area of animal health and productivity. And in that area, the focus is actually on lowering the emissions per unit of product. So it's the intensity of emissions per cow or per kilo of milk per milk. So it's all about improving, especially, of course, veterinary care, the veterinary system, and reducing the losses, so mortality, and generally increasing efficiency. Then there's also the energy and infrastructure. So generally along the value chain, of course, use of renewable energy in farm operations, in cooling, milking, and transport system. Now, as I said, let's look deeper into the enteric methane mitigation options, because earlier I said this is really where the biggest share of emissions come from. So this is a short summary from a publication, a scientific article that summarizes all the different options. And on the left hand, we have the first area would be in animal breeding and management. So there are options to select specific animals that have lower methane emissions than others. There's also, of course, the option to improve the animal productivity, the health, and the reproduction, as I mentioned earlier. Excuse me. And then there's also the area, the next one that would be the feed management and the diet formulation. So as I explained, most of that methane is produced in the rumen. So obviously we need to be looking at the digestion of the feed. That is where we have to interfere if we want to reduce enteric methane emissions. And that can be done generally by improving feed management, also decreasing the forage to concentrate ratio, using starch-rich concentrates and also lipid supplementation in general. Then, of course, if we're talking about grazing system, the forage quality is the next one that is important. We can also produce more silage and hay using generally high digestible forages, including high sugar grasses, high starch forages, and incorporating legumes. Now, there's another area which is more related to what we would say technology and innovation, and that is the rumen manipulation. So there are companies that work on producing feed additives, and some of them are also, of course, already on the market. There are still currently some obviously regulatory barriers and also safety concerns that need to be looked at. But there are very promising options available, which are already being implemented and have proven to reduce emissions. So these would be some ionophores, chemical inhibitors. So they act really in that, where the microbes produce those methane, this methane in the rumen. And there's also options to use seaweed, essential oils, tannins, and there are also vaccines that are being produced to reduce the production of methane. Now, coming to our work at FAO, so I just want to give you a short example, because obviously for countries, it's important to come up with, or generally for predicting this mitigation potential, it's important to model them and to demonstrate them. So this is what FAO is trying to do with countries. Supporting, and this is an example of this kind of modeling of mitigation scenarios. So not to get too complicated, what I just want to show, we do this by coming up with different scenarios, because it's also important, to link these scenarios with the actual practice, what is actually feasible on the ground, what can be done. So, for example, the scenario 1 here would be the introduction of a diet rich in proteins and tannins, and this leads to an increased digestibility of the feed and an increase in milk production. But the bottom line assumptions for this is that animals are in a good, healthy state. So it means that they are vaccinated, that they are dewormed, and that there's a fight against the tick-borne disease. So the result of this modeling would show that by integrating this diet rich in proteins and tannins, emissions can be reduced by 16% with a likelihood of 83%. Now we can compare with another scenario, and in another scenario, it would look like that we add, for example, feed additives, and also artificial insemination in the production system, which of course also then increases the fertility rate, milk production and digestibility, and the assumptions are also, again, as before, good animal health. And this can actually lead to an emission reduction of 26% with a likelihood of 95%. So overall, our support in terms of livestock climate actions can be grouped in different areas. So obviously there's the whole work on evidence and data. We're supporting countries in coming up with their emission baselines using the higher tier methodologies for the greenhouse gas inventories for livestock. and then doing this mitigation scenario modeling. A lot of work is, of course, has to be done in policy. So we're supporting policy dialogues, stakeholder consultations, and then supporting countries in integrating livestock in the nationally determined contributions, or, for example, also developing very specific methane reduction roadmaps for countries. Then there's a lot of work, of course, on capacity development, and supporting MRV systems. So training generally on greenhouse gas inventory development, but also a lot of capacity development for cross-sectoral collaboration, which is very important for robust MRV systems. We support also countries to access climate finance, which is much needed in the livestock sector to actually implement those best practices. And then, for example, through development of project proposals. And then, as I mentioned before, now the work on carbon markets to provide specific guidance for the livestock sector. Overall, FAO is supporting the sustainable livestock transformation. So our work is also obviously looking at scaling innovations such as feed additives and methane vaccines, use of biodigesters, and global collaboration with multiple stakeholders in the private sector. So here's just some links I want to give you, because obviously we work on building evidence for the livestock sector. On the left-hand side, you see some of our work on the livestock climate action. There's a series where we've produced some publications now for Zimbabwe, Senegal, and Burkina Faso. And there's some others coming up this year and next year. And then on the right side, this is more related now to carbon markets. You're probably familiar with the new publication on the far right, the Agri-Food Systems and Voluntary Carbon Markets, giving an outlook on the current status and the prospects. And then the other one is actually one that a couple of years ago was developed, one of the standards, the methodologies, for smallholder dairy production. So now how do we bridge this gap from climate action to carbon markets? So what I can say is, obviously, there are still many challenges. And obviously, we can identify some specific needs to overcome these challenges. So some of the challenges are related to the fact that technical solutions are available, but the implementation is slow. The other issue is farmers lack, obviously, the access to finance the implementation and have no incentives to change their practices. A big challenge are MRV systems, so the monitoring and the monitoring of let's say climate action, of reduction of emissions for the livestock sector are currently quite complex, the methodologies. And another area is the policy environment. So many countries are still also, or generally globally, the policy environment to support climate action and to support climate, the integration of livestock in climate and carbon markets is still in its infancy. So what is needed is actually a real focus on the farmer. So a farmer-focused incentives. So to really look at their mitigation actions. We need robust MRV systems, so to quantify and then certify the emission reductions. We need clear carbon market regulations and policies in place. We need partnerships wherever possible across governments and private sector, development agencies. And of course, there's still need for capacity building and development in the livestock sectors to make the livestock sector ready for the participation in the carbon market. But overall, I would say, is to unlock the full potential of livestock climate action, we must also ensure that carbon finance flows to those who take actions. So that are the farmers. So if the farmer is the one that changes a practice, they are the one that should be rewarded for it. So to conclude, I want to give you just a couple of key messages. So one of my main key messages is always, so livestock systems can play a key role in climate solutions, and they don't have to be viewed as the problem to climate change. And especially repeating by reducing the methane emissions that come from livestock systems, as they can deliver very fast and cost-effective climate results. Carbon markets can play a key role in transforming the livestock sector to become more sustainable by providing the financial incentives. Carbon credit systems should really reflect the realities of livestock systems on the ground. So we need very good and clear methodologies that then lead to equitable benefit sharing and that support, of course, a long-term change and a long-term productivity of the sector. So investments from carbon markets can actually also drive innovation that may need to enter the livestock systems. So through funding of new technologies and practices for the sustainable livestock transformation. And overall, of course, FAO continues to actively support countries in this path to sustainably transform livestock systems and increase climate action. Yeah, thank you very much.
First of all, thank you, Saskia. Thank you so much for this great presentation. Really, we will have the Q&A, as I said, like after both presentation, because we have coordinated. But thank you so much. It's very interesting to really focus on climate action within the livestock sector, who can sometimes suffer from kind of a stigma. But there is a lot of room to do stuff, as well as improving livelihoods. And I think now we can jump now more deeply into one of possible financial support for these climate mitigation action, which are carbon markets. And I would like to invite Mr. Abil Onyango, our second speaker, to share his screen for his presentation, where he's really going to deep dive into a voluntary carbon market project for livestock. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for...
I see it's coming. Perfect.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity, and I'm going to present a carbon market project in the livestock sector, looking at examples, challenges, and opportunities. It is good that we have some small understanding about what a carbon market is, and this is a trading system where credits are bought and sold, and they exist in two forms. One of it is regulated, or what we call a compliance market, and a voluntary market. So regulated market is basically regulated by the government to meet legally binding emission reduction targets. And voluntary market is driven by individuals or companies that would wish to voluntarily purchase their carbon credits to offset their greenhouse gas emissions. And sometimes they're driven by their own corporate social responsibility or sustainable goals or customer demand. Just looking at a bit of how these markets work. One is a bit of a certification process, which is quite a long process that takes place in between before an entity is given, is approved, and this is done by international standards. We have so many standards, gold standards, VCS, and there are many others. So this happens when it is proved that an entity can run a carbon project that is able to really capture real, verified, additional, permanent, and unique with positive impact to the environment. Yeah, in this market, 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent is verified to lead to an issuance of 1 carbon credit, And this carbon credit is a permit that allows an organization to trade in carbon that has been sequestered and verified according to the verification bodies. A carbon project is also called a climate project, and these are initiatives that are designed to reduce, remove, or sequester greenhouse gases, mostly in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent generated to generate carbon credits. They take very many forms. They are in many sectors, and like livestock is one of the sectors that is potential to sequester carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gas emissions. We have a life cycle. It takes quite a series of events or activities for a carbon project to start and end. So it starts by what we call a feasibility assessment, where an entity would really scan around the environment, pick a few statistics here and there, the kind of situation that it is and how people are affected, environment is affected, and what kind of activities take place there. That is important because it is important to prove additionality and permanence of what kind of activities are to be undertaken in a carbon project. Thereafter, there is a design. The design is more of now developing the required documentation, like a project design document and all the other documents that would be required and presented for financing. Preparing the PDD is their validation through independent audit bodies, VVBs. They have to validate that the actions that are stated and what is going on outside there in the field, they really are in a position to sequester greenhouse gases. Then registration with the standard. An entity must decide at the beginning what kind of registry they will be able to engage in that process, and that is a process. It also requires a bit of cost to register a carbon project. Thereafter, implementation and monitoring, where now the ground is hit with activities and also monitoring of the changes that take place. The parameters that were earmarked for consideration and monitoring are now actively followed up, and documentation is done. And thereafter, there would be a verification process. This is the process that would now quantify the tonnage of gases sequestered, and thereafter issuance of the emission reductions, and thereafter retirement, which is now sale of the credit. So in the livestock sector, we have potential areas where emission reductions could be undertaken. And at the outset, it is important that we take note that in many parts of the world, the single most effective greenhouse gas emission mitigation strategy in the livestock sector is to increase the animal productivity, whether it is milk, whether it is meat. So whatever we do that increases productivity would contribute to mitigating the gases. So some of these areas could be feed and feeding management. My colleague who presented before me talked about this. So in rural settings, you find people have left their livestock to roam about, walk about, and graze almost on everything. So it is important that this process is managed, that we do not allow our livestock just to roam about. So it's important that we think about increasing feed efficiency by optimizing the energy and protein content in the feed. Important. Sometimes interventions grow further, develop grasses, and also grow them and provide them for the livestock. The research has been done, and some nutritious feeding arrangements have been, researchers have come up with a feed that could optimize the energy and protein content in feed. Precision feeding techniques that match animal requirements and dietary nutrient supply, looking at the weight of the animals and the kind of dietary requirements they require. That is important. Locally produced feed and sourcing low emission feeds such as byproduct. There are companies that do feed and they do byproducts, and this is something that is encouraged. And then storing carbon in the soil by means of better grassland management regimes in various parts of different places. Those are some of the things that we would focus on to sequester the carbon, the management of feeding processes. Manure management. Here again, we know livestock, they have their droppings, whether they're chicken, whether they are cows, and all these types of animals. It's good that we improve on how we collect and how we store and utilize the manure from the livestock. So it is use of cow manure in biogas systems. This is also an area that is encouraged and is going to help us reduce emissions. It's also going to improve the quality of fertilizer and also replace the fossil energy sources, especially the use of trees and firewood and charcoal. Yeah, so we can also switch from the raw manure to better compost manure so that we reduce on emissions. Livestock health and husbandry is about managing the herd structure so that we do not have quite a lot of them that would erode the environment through soil erosion and also browsing of all types of green plants, green leaves, and grasses. When we reduce that number and we have a manageable number that we can put under improved management, that would be great. Reducing diseases. So disease management, how we manage the parasites is important because healthier animals, they are more productive and also have lower emission reduction per unit of output, and also improving the genetic potential of animals through breeding regimes. This can also help in a way. So in livestock sector, the carbon projects mainly focus on adoption of emission reducing, productivity enhancing practices or technologies that are out there in many different forms, greening the value chain, operations within the livestock sector, market creation for innovative waste reuse. For example, the biogas is captured, and also high quality livestock nutrition. I've already talked about this, and my colleague also talked about this: improved livestock management, grazing, silvopasture systems, where we integrate trees, pasture, and livestock in the same unit of management, and improving management of manure through composting, anaerobic processes, and also biogas plants. So it's important that whenever we design or we want to venture into a carbon project, it's good that we really understand these 4 areas, usually very important in any carbon project. One is additionality, where we must demonstrate that the emission reduction is additional to what would have actually happened without the intervention, and also permanence, that there must be long-term storage of carbon in that activity or in that project that we've designed. So that means we must be able to provide for long-term carbon sinks in that project. Core benefits, especially apart from the carbon credit, do we demonstrate the other benefits, such as, for example, livelihood improvement, income, food, biodiversity, environmental benefits, and all those kind of things, and revenue sharing, especially with communities, farmers, those that are involved in that project, the participants. What ratios of benefits are they expecting? That should be documented, because that is important for any registry to consider a carbon project. I have a case in Kenya that I would want to share with us here. This is a livelihoods Mount Elgon project. It's a dairy project that is implemented in Western Kenya, in 2 counties, Bungoma and Trans Nzoia. It is financed by Livelihood Fund, which is an investment venture created by several private companies in France in 2011. They provide upfront financing, and which is expected to be repaid through 2 ways. One is certified carbon credit, and also the increased milk sales. It is implemented by an international NGO that is very much experienced in agroforestry. So it implements and monitors the project activities and manages the whole implementation process. And in this arrangement, there is a leading dairy processor in Kenya and also East Africa, which was engaged to provide an offtake market for raw milk. So they also pay a share. The processor pays a share of increased milk sales as a result of this project to the fund. Now, key goals in this project is to improve the livelihoods for 30,000 farmers. And these 30,000 farmers, 15,000 of them must be dairy farmers. Adoption of sustainable agriculture management practices on 35,000 hectares of land, and this was meant to increase milk production from 5,000 liters per day to 135,000 liters per day, which was equivalent to about 3 to 6 to 9 liters per cow per day. So during the baseline process, a cow would produce an average of 3 liters per day, and that was to be increased to about double it to 6 or to 9 liters per day. Those sustainable agriculture practices were also meant to increase farmers' yield by 30% and sequester 1 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over a period of 10 years from 2016 to 2017 to 2026. That was meant to be achieved. I have a diagram here. I don't know whether it would be very clear to all of us. This is how the arrangement of this project is. The investor channels credit in forms of a grant to the implementing NGO, which provides capacity building to the 30,000 farmers. These 30,000 farmers are organized into groups and farmer cooperatives. So the dairy cooperatives would basically collect the milk, they chill, they cool, and the processor would come with their means of transport to ferry that milk to their processing plant, process the milk and sell to various customers, supermarkets, different outlets within the country and generally in East Africa. So from the increased sale of milk, they were able to repay back part of that increase in sale of milk, and also the trees are planted, fodder are planted, and the increase in milk production would use to estimate, collect data on parameters that would be used to estimate tonnage of carbon dioxide sequestered, and that is what is returned as verified and accounted for the registry, which in this case is a gold standard registry. So that is it, and we have a bit of challenges that we've experienced in these processes. One is market complexity and fluctuation. Here, carbon markets are a bit, it's difficult to accurately predict revenues from emission reductions because of complexity and fluctuations, especially in market pricing. It's really not having a definite market price, depends on a number of factors. We also have high costs of MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification. It's really complex, especially for agriculture sector projects, and it can also be very, very challenging and expensive to implement and maintain, especially by the small and medium enterprises. So accessibility to carbon markets is also another challenge, and it is driven by a number of factors like limited resources, information gaps, and also complex bureaucratic processes in the market. Regulatory uncertainty, yes, we all know that this is still a landscape that is evolving, just coming up. Different regions that are at different levels in terms of this market, and so regulations and policies, they are continuously changing, being developed and being refined, and so this makes it really difficult to plan long-term strategies for small entities to participate in this market. However, we have a bit of opportunities that we can leverage on. One is standard guidelines for carbon projects. We have every methodology has some guidelines that would be available for developers to provide a guideline, to provide a way on how to go about design, implementation, and monitoring. Climate change frameworks have made it favorable to venture into carbon markets. We have so many frameworks in the environment, climate change, at global level, regional level, and local level, which provide a ground for different entities to engage in this market. We also have commitment to fight climate change at different levels. Governments come, entities come to fight climate change because it's a reality that now most of the people now acknowledge that we need to do something about it. There is partnerships, and this could help entities to leverage on resources, skills, and technology for those that have ventured into it, and probably new people would want to join in this market could venture into partnerships. And lastly, the carbon markets keep on expanding in different sectors, including now the livestock, and many activities come up that could be considered as part of carbon project intervention. So that is it. I would end it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abil. Thank you very much for sharing also concrete case from Kenya. We heard from a specific case from South America on Monday. So I think it's very interesting to see how in different countries such schemes are put into place, managed, and how they are working. And I see that your presentation already triggered some question in the chat. So I think maybe Saskia and you can open back your camera. First question was for Saskia, but she already shared in the chat where to find all the great work produced by FAO. So she shared a publication. Do you want to say something more on that one to orient people a little bit or?
Yeah, I just shared a link. It's to one of the many FAO websites. So there's one that talks specifically about enteric methane, and in the publication section, yeah, one can, needs to scroll through and find, but there I would say is a collection of most of the publications. I mean, all of them that I showed. And yeah, so otherwise there's generally also the FAO repository, knowledge repository. So the general FAO search for all publications. So you can just type in what you need and yeah, you will find many things.
Great, thank you, Saskia. So just for the precision as well, and when we will share the link also as well in our in after this meeting. And now I have a question that I assume is more so for you, Habil, namely Mr. Niki, if you want to ask your question vocally, I will leave you to open your microphone and your camera to ask your question. But if not, I can also read your question in the chat. So I will just give you still the opportunity if you want to ask it directly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, quite insightful. And I trust you can all hear me. Yeah. Yeah, my question is looking at the presentation from Onyango, the carbon cycle project, the project carbon project cycle. I mean, what would be? I know the cost could be varying, but maybe if you could share some more insights into this registering a carbon project. We are working in a project within the northern of Kenya that is under the Skida 3 project. And ideally what we are doing is supporting the communities on sustainable rangeland management. And one of aspects that we've been looking at is on sustaining this, because, project is usually time bound. And we were looking at could we initiate maybe this, of course, support here and there. So that the community can be able to continue with the aspects of sustainable rangeland management. Ideally here looking at planned seasonal grazing, with, of course, some bylaws to support this initiative. And we are looking at this contributing to carbon sequestration. So we were thinking, how could we ensure the sustainability of also the system, looking at incentivizing this at the community level. So what would be the cost in terms, maybe roughly the cost of coming up with such a project? Then two, within the region, you realize that the land tenure system is still community unregistered. And I was looking at, would this be an hindrance? But I know they are in the process of registering their lands with the community. And so probably you could also mention a bit to this when we're looking at land tenure system. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I go?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you for that question. Very good and important question. When it comes to the cost, when you look at the project cycle design, is a long process. There are so many activities that take place at every level, and so the cost depends on a number of factors that for each project has their own unique settings and setups and what you need, what you want to do. So estimating costs at this time, for me, I may not be in a position to probably say that it would cost you this. That requires a kind of a number of issues to be assessed, to be looked into, so that we come up with what is quite realistic. That's what I would say on the cost. When it comes to the land tenure sector, community land is a bit tricky when it comes to this kind of engagement, because you remember somehow they're long-term projects, and also within the communities there may be some interest that may erode the gains or the prospects of this project. So usually it's very tricky. We have worked with private landowners in projects that I've worked with, and so at this level, when you would want to probably engage in community registered land, it's good that the entities coming from the government side, how the community is set up and organized, is good that we really get the right people engaged and have documentation that would safeguard the project so that you're able to attain what you intend to do and to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abil. I think on the cost question, maybe there is, if I can jump on the question, maybe there is a recommendation from your side to how to do an analysis of that, or maybe listing the main factor they need to assess to be able to estimate the cost.
Yes, a number of areas that we really need to use to estimate the cost. One is the size. We have a small project, we have a large project. So if, for example, you want to engage quite a large land surface, you need to consider that the number of landowners or farmers or communities you want to engage, that would determine the cost, and also the time. How long is your project going to last? That determines the cost. The kind of activities you'd want to do determines the cost. Sometimes you'd want to buy some inputs, you want to distribute some inputs, and you also want to support probably trainings where you incur costs. Those kind of considerations could be made to arrive at the cost. And of course, when the stakeholders are engaged and brought on board, we need also to have such costs. Thinking about also the registries you want to use to premix your project, because different registries, they have different costs at different levels. Those could be some of the factors to consider. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the precision. Maybe I see the time going more quicker than I expected, so I will give the word to Marie Latia, and then I will maybe bundle it with some questions in the chat if they are relevant, so that you can answer more than one question at once. So, Miss Latia, if you want to take the floor. We are not yet able to hear you. I don't know if your maybe microphone is not working now. Okay. So now I see you. I cannot hear you yet. No, I'm sorry. Maybe try again, or type in the chat and I will read your question out loud. Great. Thank you for wanting to jump in as well. So now there is a question in French, which I will translate for you. So there is one mainly on because a small-scale African producer face constraint regarding accessing of finance, and that's of course limiting their ability to adopt innovation necessary to carbon markets sometimes. What change so in that framework, as well as because changing behavior in agricultural practice is always a challenge, what is concrete recommendation that you would give to reduce methane by agricultural and livestock sector, or yes, what would the concrete action that you would do to try to restrain this quantity, and also to sustainably promote the adoption of the practices despite sometimes financial obstacle? I think that question could be for both of you.
Yeah, I can start maybe. I just put the question also in Google Translate. So I think so. From what I understand, what we want to know, obviously the situation for many smallholder farmers is, as you said, it's the incentives to actually change a practice. They need to be there. So, and I think from experience, they can come from several areas. So what FAO has long been working with the so-called farmer field schools, and generally we know that by demonstrating an impact and by having maybe champion farmers who change a practice and then implement something and can demonstrate the positive outcome for the farmer, that is really key. And then triggering also maybe a change in other farmers. So I think there, as I said, there are two obstacles. One is, of course, if it's a change that requires finance, that requires investment, that is one thing. But many of the changes also just require a behavior change. So actually, you can discuss which of the two is more difficult. It's not so clear, because of course, when it's now, if we talk about finance, that's why we're also talking about carbon markets, because I mean we need investment in the sector, so that can come through private sector investment. Best working usually is obviously when it is through maybe production cooperatives, farmers that are organized and have a direct relation to other processors or something. Yeah, so that is one, and that's why we're talking about carbon markets. So how can actually that be amplified? So we're not only relying on private investment, but in really finding ways to develop also projects for the voluntary carbon market, etc. So I think that is of course another thing to maybe kickstart some of the changes. Development projects can help to initiate a change. But yeah, so I think the key is that the practice change needs to demonstrate real benefit for the farmer. So if the farmer doesn't notice that, and benefit, I mean, for example, increased health, more healthy animals, more production, so more milk they can sell. Yeah, and then I think the question, I don't know, I think it talked also about like concrete practices. So I know this is difficult to say generally because it depends on this production system. So as my colleague was mentioning, in some areas in Africa, livestock is not really being managed because space is no problem. So they graze and roam freely, and that is where, of course, we need to think about how can farmers be incentivized to manage them, because just by managing them, where they graze, how much, and maybe adding some supplements or adding some, producing some silage can already, make the whole system more productive. But that depends if that is the main objective of the farmer or not. And then, of course, there are also other realities where there's no space for grazing, where farmers keep one cow or something on their farm. And I think there maybe the interventions are even more clear because maybe farmers are more interested in actually, having that one cow to be more productive, more healthy. And then it's also a matter of, supplying the service, like veterinary services. So all of these obviously has to be also linked with the national policy environment and the services that can be provided. But yeah, maybe I stop.
No, I think Saskia, you answer very great. Abil, you can of course come in if you have even another addition, but I think otherwise we can also try to take the most question that we can.
I agree, that was quite rich and elaborate. May not add for now. Maybe
Okay.
we address the other questions that are still there.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
And also, Ms. Latja wrote that they are a training institution and they are trying to start now on carbon markets on the request of their partners and on the farmers. And so she already shared in the chat her email address if there is any way to set something up. So just making you aware, Saskia and Abil. So now there is a question to different presenter, come from Ms. Katia Halabi. Would you like to ask your question yourself? If so, you are welcome to open your camera and microphone. And if not, I will ask them for you.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks a lot to the two presenters. Very nice, very interesting presentations, and thanks for organizing that. So the first question was to Saskia. There are different raising systems, techniques, but farming systems. You mentioned some in Africa, but there are very different ones across countries and parts of the world. I was actually wondering, are there more animals, ruminants, I don't know, in different parts of the world, due to the concentration of the animals, due to the techniques? Which parts of the world are actually contributing more to methane emissions? I was thinking you might have a presentation or a graph or something, a visual on that. And as you might be looking for it, I asked the question to Mr. Onyango also. The program you mentioned is actually, you said, had been running since 2016 and is finishing next year, which means we are close to the end. And so my question, I was actually wondering, well, does it seem promising? Like, is it then an example of the way to organize a program or project? How likely is it to achieve its indicators? You might not have everything, but maybe you know a bit where they stand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can I start with this, if I'm allowed? Yeah, that was a 10-year project. Is ending next year, which is so close. In terms of indicators about milk production, we were able to ascertain. I worked there some time before I left in 2024. By the time I was leaving, milk production per cow was 5 liters per day, which, as I know now, has increased. I don't have the current statistics. This was driven by the feeding regime that was promoted. Farmers were supported to plant a shrub that we call Caliandra. Caliandra is known to rapidly increase milk quality and also quantity, and also plus supplementing with the other feeds that were proved to have very, very easy ability to increase that milk production. The project did not venture into improving the breed. It was just improving the feeding so that the milk quantity would increase, and that increased up to that level. Farmers intended to work with were 30,000. By the time I was leaving, there were 29,000 plus, and the hectares of land that was to be rehabilitated and supported with different land, sustainable agriculture land management activities were 26,000 plus. So when you look at it in 10 years, it was closer to meeting some of the targeted areas to be achieved. There were also negotiations if this could increase to 20 years. So up to now, I'm not very sure whether the discussions were approved or not, but there were some indications that it could improve. The longevity of the project would increase to about 20 years because the financials were ready to support again. And I would just mention here that for farmers, anything that guarantees access to market, they would really work hard to really improve their productivity so that they can be able to sustain that kind of market. The motivation was the offtake that was regular. The offtake market, they needed increased milk, and they can absorb as much as farmers would be able to bring to the table. There were what we call locked prices. These farmers were guaranteed some prices that were not offered to the other farmers that were just producing individually, not organized. Because of the efforts of collecting, chilling, cooling the milk, and managing the quality at the point of collection, really motivated farmers to go back and do practices to really achieve the intended target. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your answer. I think it ties back what you just said about farmers want to see the market access, and if they can see it it works as an incentive as well as answering a little bit the question we had earlier about how to support adoption of sustainable practices, like showing the concrete benefit that can come. And so I think that that's a really interesting comment. Ms. Halabi, do you have a follow-up question, or should I give it to Saskia if she found the graph in between the
Yes,
super work of the FIL?
Yeah,
She can share
no.
later.
Yeah, thanks. It's not so easy. No, thanks for the question. It's definitely a valid question, and I know why people are very interested in it, but it's not so easy to answer because it's always important you need to consider the, like, you know, the what kind of emissions you're looking at. So of course, globally, I mean, current emissions from livestock, they are the most are from countries from, you know, industrialized countries, from North America, from the EU. So, for example, I know we have recently done one analysis looking specifically only on methane emissions, and it is actually a fact that I think it's only 28 countries or something that cover over 80% of all emissions from livestock methane. So, meaning that most of the countries that we're talking about in Africa, in Asia, of course, their emissions are very low. I mean, compared to global emissions, compared to emissions in countries where you have very industrial, high intensive livestock production systems. But also, of course, another way to look at the emissions is the projections for the future. And I think that's also important because obviously we have some countries and regions, specifically in Asia, but also in Africa, that, I mean, the projection, you know, the increase in emissions from livestock is much higher than in North America and Europe, where we are stagnating. I mean, or actually potentially going down because of the restrictions. And then another factor is what we like to talk about a lot is the emission intensity. So obviously in industrialized systems, let's say the relationship between the product, so that what the cows produce in terms of milk and meat and emissions is much lower. So the cow that emits less methane for the product that it produces. But in many developing settings, I mean, where production is quite just not intensive, extensive, or where we have low productivity, you have a high emission intensity. And that's also something where, let's say, interventions try to make that modification. So instead of, let's say, saying we need to especially in countries in Africa, I know in some countries they have a lot of livestock, and people and countries, I mean, obviously don't like to talk about reducing the number of livestock, because obviously reducing number of livestock would immediately decrease the methane emissions. But what we can rather say is we don't reduce the number of livestock, but we make the ones that are there more productive, as the demand is growing either way for the products. So I hope I'm still going to look for some graphs. I know there are, definitely there are, but I don't. Yeah, I need to look for some that make sense. And again, it always depends, like, what are the factors you're actually looking at. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saskia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We know the FIO has a huge, has data on everything, and so it's not so easy to find data on one thing sometimes on the go. But thank you so much for this answer. We are 4 minutes before end, so I feel like I see no other hand, and there is no more question in the chat. So I would maybe take these few minutes to close so that we can end right on time for this expert talk. No, I see a hand, so I will give it to Mr. Fischer, if I see pronounce the name correctly, for a question from his side.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you for this presentation and so on. I have just one remark to the thing between when you look at the animals here in in Africa and other developing countries where they're kept in very extensive form and so on. The thing is, if you just look at the individual animals and how much methane they produce and so on, it will not give you the whole picture. And I mean, you also mentioned it in this presentation. The thing is, you have to look at the whole livestock system, because when it comes to grazing, if the grazing is properly managed, then a lot of other factors like carbon sequestration and whatever is there increases a lot. And so if you put all these factors together, I mean, I don't have the latest research, and I'm also not too deep in this whole thing, then at the end, these animals have less carbon emissions compared to the intensive keeping of animals in a European or in another system where there are a lot of animals and with high feeding and so on and high productivity. So there we have really to look at the livestock system and put all the different factors together. So that is just a comment from my side to put this a bit in perspective, this high methane output of the low management animals in developing countries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If I may just react quickly.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the comment. And definitely, it's so true. And yeah, I don't want to sound like we need to, make everything more intensive. That's not the solution. That really depends on the production system. And it also, I mean, it shows first of all, the multiple uses, the diversity for livestock, so the role it plays. And also, actually, that is one of the challenges in also defining the different values livestock has. So when we talk about carbon market, carbon credit, we're talking about economical values, but there's much more to that livestock plays a role in. And as also, Mr. Fischer, you mentioned specifically for the ecosystem service. So extensive systems cannot easily be compared to a dairy production intensive system. So because the use of the livestock is different. But what I like, there are some very good examples actually in this area for extensive grazing. Now, me that I'm based in Southern Africa, I've seen that in Zambia and Zimbabwe. So there are many nice examples where livestock is really fully integrated into the ecosystem and supporting actually the rangeland management, so the natural maintaining of the ecosystem. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your reaction. Now I see we are on the 30 on the dot. So I really want to give another round of applause to our great speakers today. Thank you so much, Abil and Saskia, for making the time. I just want to say, if you want to learn even more about climate smart agribusinesses, essentials, adaptation, mitigation, you can also join our e-academy. Maybe it's interesting for your project. It's a self-paced, self-tutored courses that are free of charge and accessible for everyone in English for now and soon in French. So just wanted to, if you want to discuss more about these strategies as well. And then thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. I will now stop the sharing and stop the recording, and I wish you